Hello, everybody, and welcome to our next session about craft, about writing, and things that excite us. Today, we're going to talk about training, something that I care deeply about. I don't know if it's more than magic systems that I care about it, but I do care about it a great deal. Before I just go wildly off the tracks and talk about everything that's on my mind, and I will try to not do too much of that, I do, of course, want to give props to all my fellows that are here, and both Erica, Mason, Cameron, everyone hanging out. But I also want to give them an opportunity to say something that maybe, well, actually like two things. One is, are you someone that even notices training? Like, are you aware of like training when you're reading, watching shows? And then how do you feel about training? All right, do you like it, or you're like, let's get over this, where's the montage? And then if you do like it, maybe what's a favorite, or something you hate. So there you go. Let's go around and circle. What do we think about that, everybody?
I really like that training gives you an opportunity to showcase an arc. One of my favorite training books is Divergent, because I'm like 5'1", 120 pounds, so I know exactly how useless I'd be in a fight. And you see all these really competent YA protagonists who are teensy, tiny girls, and it just doesn't affect them at all. They're still big and tough. Like, there's a couple lines towards the beginning of Hunger Games about how Katniss is short, but it never comes into play. She's always pretty competent. And Divergent is a 400 or 500 or so page book where you see this girl who's got a wimpy build from a wimpy background. She's from this culture where it's entirely about being caring and just being compassionate and tending people's needs. And she has no warrior background, and that's what she needs to survive. And she just gets beat up over and over and over again. But finally, she builds enough competency and muscle to the point where she's getting dressed towards the end of the book, and she realizes that her clothes don't fit anymore because she's too muscly now. And that felt like this huge vicarious empowerment moment where she's not awesome from the get-go, like you see most female characters in that kind of type of genre be, but you get to see her build herself up to the point where she is that. So that's one of my all-time favorites.
Awesome.
One of the things that I like about training is just that it gives a very clear sense of progression. Kind of like Erica was just saying, it helps with the character arc. I love the sense of leveling up, and training sequences either are that where you show the advancement that the character has made, whether it's in fighting or in magic or whatever the case may be, or it lays the groundwork for that leveling up that then occurs after the training. Either way, it gives you a sense of forward momentum for the character. The one that I always think of is the granddaddy, sort of one of the first training montages that I can remember, at least, is from Rocky, right? And it's sort of the classic because it really is what so many others are modeled on, where you it's the training montage with the pounding music and whatever, and it steps him through exercise after exercise and shows gradual improvement, but compresses it down into a short amount of screen time. And really, it was pretty remarkable at the time, I would imagine, for what it accomplished, even though we take it for granted now as one of the most tired of tropes. There's a reason it started there and continued to be used in that same format for so very long. It's because it's very effective and it's very fun to watch. You like seeing the people that you're following and that you like get better.
So much.
Yeah.
But Mason, go ahead.
Gosh, let me think. I'm trying to think about the last book that I read that had a training montage in it. The one that's coming to mind right now, I think, is Mistborn, which I think maybe touches on some level like the versatility of training montages, which I think is something we'll probably get into. But different training montages, I think, accomplish different things, right? Like Rocky going out and training makes it more believable for us when he gets into the boxing ring, and kind of lets us kind of get excited to see how he will do now that he has become better, right? I think Mistborn's training montage with Vin in the first book accomplishes this, but I think it also is pretty deftly used by Brandon Sanderson as a means by which to explain the particular rules of the magic and world in which that particular story takes place, which I think is definitely one of the appeals for training montages in fantasy or sci-fi stories. The other one that I'm thinking about now is actually probably Skyward, another Brandon Sanderson book that also has training, that also teaches us the rules of the quote unquote magic system, in this particular case, sci-fi magic system, right? And the rules of that particular setting as well. Yeah. So I think you can use them for different reasons, and I think both of those kind of accomplish that particular aim or goal of the training montage.
All right. And it seems like you're pro training, Mason. You enjoy the training when you see it?
I like purposeful training. I dislike superfluous training. If we're gonna bust out the dictionary real quick. Not to pat myself on the back for my vocabulary or anything like that, but I think some training has a purpose and some training doesn't.
I hear that. I hear that. It's very interesting we got into training montages, which I wasn't even thinking about, but of course we should. I think one of the reasons that it wasn't on my mind is because, at least personally, I don't think we see a lot of training montages in books. We see them more in movies, because in books, normally, if you were to create something like a montage, it would be a lot of like really quick scenes back to back, which could feel a little strange, like all the time jumps that are taking place. Whereas in a movie, you can just do that, right? We're like, cool, I know what this is. So yeah, I think that's a tool we see a bit more in film than we do in writing. But we can definitely still talk about time, right? Like the amount of time the writer spends on training. Is it over multiple scenes? Is it kind of one big moment of learning and the rest is happening during? And so that's what I kind of like to dig into a little bit. I'm glad you brought up Mistborn, Mason, because I do think that is a really good example of training happening over multiple scenes and also having to do with character. So it's doing more than just training. So it's telling about the world and it's also character, because for those who aren't familiar with it, what the training does is there's basically multiple powers that this main character has. And so the training takes place with each person who's best at that power. Instead of her like one mentor training her on everything, he trains her on what he's best at, and then she gets training from other people on what they're best at. And so I think that does a nice job of justifying having multiple training scenes, letting it spread out over time, right? Letting us get it one-on-one time with each character. And so I think that's an example of successful training that happens. Obviously, dangers of training can be boring the reader or giving information that they're just not engaged in yet. They don't know why it matters. But I do think that training, at least in some ways, is happening in most. I'm going to go on one here and say most successful novels, because I think there's a huge danger to not have training. But I'd love to hear what you all think that danger might be. What could happen if we don't get training in a novel or in a story? What do y'all think?
You get Ray.
Ooh. You get Rey and a host of other Star Wars characters. Let's not all just dump it on her.
Let's spread the blame around equally.
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead, Mason.
No, you're good. I was just gonna say, I do think it is possible for the training to have taken place before the story, right? Ned Stark has trained a lot in sword fighting, and we know that from the get-go, right? But we don't necessarily need to see that, because the story of Game of Thrones is not the story of Ned Stark becoming a powerful individual. Spoiler alert: the Game of Thrones, when it includes Ned Stark, mostly is about his demise and slow but steady destruction, right?
But he is training in the political spectrum, interesting
Sure.
enough, where you learn that he's not that great at it, and he's got to kind of like learn about secrets and stuff like that. So we do see him growing in that regard, but then sadly,
Sure.
that's kind of. But I'm really glad you brought it up, because yes, absolutely, we can start with characters who have these proficiencies, and then the story ends up being about something else, or them gaining new proficiencies because their current proficiency doesn't work in their environment. But
Sure.
please, yeah.
Sure. I think that maybe brings up an interesting question of like what precisely, like where the line between growth and training is, right? Because when I think of Ned Stark's growth as a politician, I don't necessarily think of it as training. I am, as a fool would, referring to the TV show here, because I know more about it than I do about the books. And it's very possible that he gets much more explicit training within George R.R. Martin's no doubt masterfully written pages, but at the very least within the television show, right? Like he just kind of picks things up as he goes.
On the job training, if you will.
Yes. Fair enough. Yeah, so I do think I do think it is possible for people to be experts at the start of your story. I think it depends on what kind of story you want to be teaching or expounding to the reader.
I think it depends on whether you're going for an awesome punch or whether you're going for relatability and using your character as an audience surrogate. Like I grew up on the classic Mulan, the 1998 cartoon version, and I both like and dislike things about the 2020 remake. But one thing that was hard for me is that she comes in with this superpower almost, and there is a growth moment where she just embraces that power more, and she's able to make it up to the mountaintop with the water before all the man-switchers do. But what was so satisfying about that montage scene that I would watch over and over again in ninth grade is she was just normal. She's a girl in this army full of men, and she's facing realistic physical disadvantages, and you get to see her be competent, and you get to see her going through the same task over and over again, but also being innovative and doing the medal thing where she's finding a new way to face a challenge that she wasn't up to in the beginning. And so I feel like the story lost that for me when I didn't get to see the training and innovativeness in this new remake.
I couldn't agree more. Tugging to my heartstrings with that one, Erica, because that training scene in Mulan is, I love it. But Cameron, look like you're about to say something. Please go ahead.
No, what I was gonna say in dropping my little snarky truth bomb there is simply the danger in missing out on training is one of two possibilities. If you start with the expert, then you risk having your character be overpowered and not having to strive, right? So that lowers the stakes, makes it harder for you to feel any victory when it is earned because it came easily. On the other end of the spectrum, if you have a newbie coming in and then just decimating everybody, a la Ray, then it feels unearned. If they haven't put in the time and the effort and they're just effortlessly amazing at whatever it is that they are doing, then it feels unbelievable from my point of view, at least. And again, lessens your buy-in on that character, because it's like, well, they're just gonna murder everybody anyways because they're just so good. And how did they get that way? Just because the story says so. I'm out, right? So on either end of those, I think you can certainly get away with the expert more easily than you can get away with the Mary Sue, which is, if you've never heard that, that's just sort of the term that people use for this unexplainedly powerful character. But there's still a danger on either side.
Yeah, I love these answers. I was going to say that I agree that usually if you do have someone that's amazing, then you need something else. You need something else that they're bad at, that's tough for them in their life, or someone that's even better than they basically are. For those anime fans out there, One Punch Man is an example of that. One Punch Man is a really interesting take on sort of the Superman syndrome. Superman is a notoriously hard character to write for because he is so overpowered, and so you have to find these weaknesses like kryptonite, or it's his family that's having trouble, like in the new series that just came out for him, which I think is an interesting take on Superman. But One Punch Man has that where he's so overpowered, and because of that, he's kind of bored and sad. And also nobody knows who he is, so he doesn't get the acclaim for being amazing. And so I do think that expert story can work, absolutely, but then you need those other things, right? The other one where someone just comes in is unexplainably awesome, that just kills me inside. And I think it's why I love training so much. But I understand there are writers out there that don't want to have chapter upon chapter of training scenes. What Mason was talking about, I think, is the idea of traditional training, is you've got a mentor or some other figure that's telling someone how to do something or explaining someone how to do something, and they're trying to do it. They're just sort of doing it in like a box, like in a safe environment for the most part. And then later they get to go do the thing they did in the safe environment in the real world, right? Versus like real world on the job training, like I was talking about. So I do just want to put out there that I don't think you have to necessarily have the, in the gym training, in the safe box training that happens. I think you can get training happening on the road, or like, in meteors, like while it's taking place. But by showing that there is something that is learned for the application later, I think that does create a lot of satisfaction as a reader or watcher. So something I'd like to just put out there as my sort of tip for training, and obviously everyone feel free to do their own, is I would say, think about what it is that you want your character to accomplish. And then that's going to help you know what they then need training about. They're thinking like, what do I want them to be able to do? How do I want them to be able to succeed? What is that awesome move that I want them to be able to do at the end? How are they going to defeat the big enemy, or overcome? Figure out how they're going to do that, and then make sure that you've got, at least once that they've learned or tried this thing before, and that can really create satisfaction for that end. All right, what about you all? Any tips for writing training?
One right here. If you just hate writing these scenes, you can cheat some. Like if you don't want to spend the time in the gym and that sounds super boring to you, give us the conversation scene as everybody's getting a drink and wiping down afterwards, or hitting the showers or whatever, so you can get in the character moments that you want, while still implying that the training happened without necessarily having to see it all. That or as Mason was talking about earlier with Mistborn and Skyward, make those scenes pull double duty, where they are character focused as the training is happening, but you're actually paying attention to the struggle between your protagonist and the bully or whoever else, right? And doubling or even tripling up on the purpose of a scene can make it feel more vital and more interesting if you really just don't care about that training.
Jumping off that, I say it's really great to lean on relationship, because if they're training at all, they're probably not training alone if they don't have that competency yet. So it's a really great opportunity for a mentorship or a friendship or a rivalry, and there's a lot of good character dynamics you can explore there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you can make about the character, the scene, the interaction, the dialogue. Awesome. Please, Mason.
Yeah, absolutely. I would also say, like, figure out what you're trying to do with training and with your character, right? Because I think both of those things will inform what the training looks like, right? I personally get tired of like Superman training scenes where it's like Superman learning how to fly, because that's not the part of Superman that I care about, right? And that's not the part of Superman where he has to spend a ton of time training, at least like historically speaking, right? A lot of the time when Superman is developing is when he is trained in the philosophy and ethics that will govern his life, because that is his struggle, right? Beating Lex Luthor isn't hard. beating Lex Luthor and making sure that no one dies, because if they do, he will carry the ethical and psychological weight of that. That is difficult, right? So I think there are very different kinds of trainings, kinds of teachings that your characters can go through depending on what your goal with that character is. If you've got a Superman on your hands, I frankly don't want to waste my time reading about how exactly he goes about flying. But if you have, like, I mean, if you have a Spider-Man on your hands or something like that, or I don't know, like if you have someone else who need, this is their difficult thing, the philosophical, ethical stuff, that's not the concern. This concern is the skill. Please feel free, you know.
I think what you're talking about is if you got a character that's afraid of heights and needs to go rescue someone on the top of a building, then their ability to fly matters, right? So like, what is it that's gonna matter for them, their character, their goals, finding ways to work it in at other points in their life. Thank you for all these great suggestions here, things I'm gonna think about too. I hope you all out there have enjoyed listening to us talk about this. Obviously, feel free to share your own favorite training, and good luck as you keep writing. We'll see you next time. Blackouts.